Hi there, I'm Trevor Coote, and this is Business is Fucking Hard, the podcast where business owners pull back the curtain and talk about the realities of owning a business. We'll hear their stories, learn some lessons, and have some fun along the way. Thanks for joining us. On today's episode, we are joined by Karri Green-Schuermans. Karri is co-owner of Chambar restaurant in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Restaurant ownership is challenging at the best of times, but as we'll hear, proper systems can help with that. Here's a quote from the Chambar restaurant that I think provides a proper introduction to this episode. Quote, Karri and Nico, alongside their bacchanal-inducing staff, have conjured up a cosmic brand of revelry, a phenomenon they've coined civilized debauchery. That still constitutes the single most unassailable blueprint for operational success. End quote. I hope you enjoy this episode. Karri Green-Schuermans, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I have had, I think you're guest number 27, 28, something like that, putting out an episode a week. And maybe surprisingly, maybe not, this is my first conversation with a restaurant owner. I've had other conversations with bakery owners and coffee shops and that kind of thing. But I'm looking forward to this because I think the restaurant industry kind of stands apart in challenging times. Certainly as we went through COVID, the recovery from COVID, it seems like the margins are always a little bit more challenging than other businesses. So I'm looking forward to really diving into all of that, and we'll get into that. But as I do with everyone, I want to start with your introduction to business. What was that first introduction? Where did you get started in your entrepreneurial journey?
My for real first entrepreneurial.
I've joked about this on the podcast that it seems like we have a child labor problem in Canada because everybody starts with the stories of washing cars or pushing lawnmowers or whatever.
I mean, my first job that wasn't working for someone else was in university. I realized that if I was going to do well, I had to find another way to earn money other than like working at a restaurant or having a job. Like the wages weren't enough. So I figured that selling mushroom chocolates at the bar and working once a week was more lucrative than working 4 days a week. And so I did that and ended up having enough money to be able to ski on the weekends and still get really good marks. So that was my first figure it out, which I love the analogy of an entrepreneur of like you jump and you build it on the way down because it seems like it's constantly relevant.
Absolutely.
The reason that I'm in the business I am now, a restaurant, I had a corporate background and whole life of corporate and working for the city of Sydney in Australia, showing my age, but I was around when the internet came about, which probably as a result of all the mushrooms, I really understood open source before people knew a word for open source, and really like went up the corporate ladder really fast because of my ability to understand complexity and hold a lot of information and see systems. So, but I have a restaurant because I married a chef, and he's very talented, and I had what he didn't have, and he was also not really happy working for other people that couldn't see or acknowledge what his talents were, and he was really frustrated working for people that didn't have the same passion as him, and that there not being space for him to be able to be in creative practice. So it made sense that I had the business acumen and financial aptitude and marketing skills to be able to do. Not that I thought that I knew what I knew going in, but that was not true.
Yeah.
As with any business.
Yeah, and that's become a theme, and we'll talk about it in a second, that whole, you can't possibly learn, you learn more by doing in business than you can possibly learn getting ready for business or through the education kind of environment.
Yeah,
Um,
which
but
is very true. I did an MBA and I've definitely learned 10 times more being in business than I ever did learning the
so
theory.
when did you do your MBA? Was that
I did it while I was
before?
working in Sydney.
Yeah. Okay.
So in like late 90s.
Yeah. So, but it was before the restaurant. So
Yeah.
my other question is then how much was transferable, like to like, and you've kind of already answered that, but recognizing that you had more of the business side and your husband had more of the creative side, the food side, um was all of the skills that you learned prior to all of the learning that you did once you got into business, was that through kind of those corporate environments in Australia, or was some
I
of it
think
through
like
school? Or
I understood the importance of having good systems because when you're working in an organization that has hundreds of people, you understand how important systems are to create a structure for people to work in and for communication at scale and the problems with it and what you lose by scaling. I think the theory of it definitely transfers, but the reason I left the corporate world was because I finally, got to the corner office and was at the executive and was 20 years younger than everyone else. And so in every term had found success. And I was just didn't want to be there. I was like, I want to be in business and I want to be part of something bigger than myself. And I've learned so much. But I just saw people making decisions against their own personal values. And I saw the erosion of morality the bigger you get. And I was like, there has to be another way. And really, the reason that we came to Canada is because I didn't want to. I had a contract with the Olympics outside of my job for the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games. And I didn't want to go back into that environment. I was pretty burnt because I'd like gone so hard so fast and was so hell bent on getting to the spot so quickly. But I was just like, there must be another way. So we came to Canada and went and lived in Whistler and we're basically ski bums. And I worked at night at Earl's, which was like a big drop in career. But I just like spent the evenings after service going through, they used to have these like leather bound Bibles of Earl's and like really understanding and like really getting into their systems and asking a lot of questions. So I thought I kind of knew everything there was to know about restaurants when we came to open a restaurant. But, little did I know, which of course I should know from working in a corporate environment that, there's these centralized departments of the financial and, quite a bit that is all decision making and information that is not available at the like retail restaurant
yeah,
location. So I had to kind of learn that on the fly, which is
yeah, of
fine. Like
course.
I just know how to figure stuff out, which is really, really what gets me through is like, if there's a problem, you just figure it out. Ask
Yeah.
people.
So I want to unpack your comments about the systems and scaling, because like that would be some of the stuff that was happening in the Earl's corporate environment that you weren't exposed to in those leather bound books, that then you had to start to leverage your experience on that in the corporate environment. But before we get there, I want to talk about that. I'm really curious about this decision moving from the corporate environment to going to a ski bum service environment and then going into business. So how much of it was, I mean, you've kind of talked about the rationale about moving, away from that corporate environment, that what you were feeling and the pressure, but was there fear? And I think that's my biggest question. Fear from moving away from that into like taking that downtime, but then deciding to open a business and going out onto that, taking the step onto that ledge. Was that, how much of that was kind of unknown for you?
I mean, it was all unknown, but I have the privilege of having had change throughout my entire life. Like I didn't live in the same place for more than 2 years until my 20s. I lived all through Central and South America, traveling with a single dad. Lived in New Zealand. Like was born in New Zealand and went back and spent a lot of time there. So for me, going into the unknown and change and being thrown into completely different environments, I've never had a hesitation. And if anything,
Wow.
if I feel fear towards something, I like go towards it. Like I want to, like I
Yeah.
think maybe being a realist, I will go to the worst to know what the reality is because I feel much better prepared knowing. And even writing the business plan for Chambar, I was like, what is the worst of the worst? And I still, having spent 2 months, I locked myself in a friend's warehouse for 2 months and wrote the business plan like 12 hours a day. And still to this day, that business plan holds because all
Wow.
the indicators of failure are like, I think really good advice is like knowing that you can always fail. So if you're constantly knowing what those points are, not that you don't get surprised, like, the first economic crash in 2008 while we were in business completely changed the way we did business, and we would not have survived COVID, even though we barely survived that, if I hadn't had that experience and recalibrated the way I did business and had cash flow access. So I think, it's the serendipitous fate learning that prepares you for the next thing. Like if you are awake enough to pay attention and be like, okay, now that's possible. How do I make sure that can't happen again?
It's such an interesting, I mean, the whole idea of failure in business, like it becomes a motivating factor, but is it motivating because of fear or because of inspiration?
I mean, I think it's somewhere in the middle. There's this
Yeah.
like space in the middle of you. If you want to innovate, if you're driven by fear, then you're focusing on the fear. So I don't think of what could go wrong as fear. It's like if there's something that you should be concerned about, then you're focusing on it for the sake of like, how do I make sure that doesn't happen? Like from a risk mitigation perspective, what do I need to put in place so that doesn't happen? If I'm scared of something, I'm
Right.
not going to waste my time and energy stressing and freaking out about it. I'm going to do whatever I need to make sure it doesn't happen.
Yeah. And so in advance of 2008, the financial crisis, do you feel you that was more of a reactionary environment for you? You kind of used that to kind of put those systems in place, and then that set you up properly for, or better. I mean, not awesome, but a better chance of surviving COVID than not.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
was just, I think when the economic crash hit, I think the awareness that as a sector, the restaurants, if there's anything happening economically, because we have every sector participating in the restaurant business. I mean, we're kind of in we have a good portion of middle class, so we feel it maybe more so than a high end, very elite restaurant that's,
Right.
crazy expensive and servicing ultra elite wealthy kind of clientele,
Right.
where we get the full spectrum of like super high net worth and people that are coming once a year for a special occasion. So we have like such a beautiful diversity of like socioeconomic clientele, which I really love and appreciate. But because of that, if there's anything happening, we feel it. We're first. Like
Yeah.
restaurants are the first place that people retract. So, this year has been, as we're in this economic recession, and especially because of the actor writer strike, that was a huge hit. There's like 3 billion a year that comes through BC. That was
Huh.
nothing for 11 months. And we really saw that really hit us hard. So, kind of just scraping through COVID and then getting smacked with this, and it's not coming back anytime soon. It definitely makes it difficult. And then I think for restaurateurs especially, it's hard now because most customers can only take a certain amount of price increase. And we have just, with the commodification of food mostly, we're seeing the rising costs of food directly associated with basically the markets making all the money and using data to take any blip in change and then change the price accordingly, and obviously never come down. That has been the biggest detriment, I think, to the restaurant industry, is the commodification of food.
That's fascinating, and I hadn't thought. Well, I mean, unless you're in it, I can't imagine that anybody would be sitting back and thinking about the impacts throughout the value chain in that commoditization kind of environment. But what you're saying is that from a wholesale perspective, they have the opportunity to watch markets and adjust in real time their pricing that affects you. But you don't have that same opportunity when you create a menu for the consumer. The consumer
No,
is
because
expecting that your
people
prices
can
are going to be
pay
fairly static.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you remembered, there was the two things that affect the restaurants the most is, firstly, the commodification of food because of the rising costs. I mean, a lot of that has to do with globalization. It's just the reality. And governments that are just taxing their way out of problems and not understanding the effect on the economy of businesses. Like, independent businesses are getting hammered so hard by taxes. The amount of tax increases we've had in the last 10 years especially is it's making it impossible. And I think the harshest part of that is that businesses, especially restaurants, are having to be faced with challenging their own morality, and nobody wants to do that. They don't want to buy cheaper food that's bounced around in a box from Mexico. And people are having to do that to stay alive. And it's like our whole local food systems rely on restaurants ordering from them. And if those collapse because restaurants have to switch to buying cheaper food, which the only reason it's cheaper is because there's the wages in Mexico are, a fraction of what they are here for farmers. And that's not the right thing to do, environmentally, ethically, sustainably. It's just, and then, the commodification of food is an example. Last year, there was a drought in Alberta. So the ranchers took cattle to market early. So the market saw all the beef coming to market early. So therefore, the data predicts that there'll be a shortage the following month. So supply demand, the price goes up. But it wasn't that there was any less coming to market. And the ranchers had to take the hit in order to get the price they needed, if they're not contract buying, that they're having to pay for feedlot. So it's costing them more to get to market, to get the same, for the animals that they're putting in. And so, but what we saw was this huge spike in the price of beef again. I don't know if you remember, but there was a huge increase in in restaurants, all of a sudden steaks were just so expensive.
Yes.
So the reason that happened is because the Canadian government opened up, increased the allowable export of beef to China by 30%. So immediately all our AAA beef was gone, and the consumer of Canadians pay because now there's a huge shortage of beef for the Canadian market, so the price spikes. So these complex systems overlaying, and the people in government don't have the business acumen to understand the complexities of the decisions they make. And they're not understanding the ripple effect of those on local economies. Because if your restaurant prices become too expensive, then people are either spending the money or not. We're I think we're fourth largest employer in Canada. So it's arguably restaurants are the local economy. If people can't afford to go out, then they're not gathering the same way. That's not good for community building. That's not good for our local communities. We employ the creative sector. So where are the artists? Where are the photographers? Where are the up and coming film industry? Where are the university students? I don't know, maybe OnlyFans will employ them all.
Oh, jeez.
But we lost like 60% of restaurants in Canada during COVID, and there's like another wave that are going. So, I mean, I always joke like restaurants are like democracy, they require participation. And like we're competing against Netflix and Uber Eats, and people are just not going out. They're
Yeah.
spending the same amount to eat at home with food delivery as they are in a restaurant, and the experience is like really not the
Yeah.
same, or the energy that you receive by going and being in a room full of people. But there's definitely like there's been such a shift socially post COVID, so it's a rough ride right now to be able to like survive through this. But I think what keeps us going is like who do you trust that you haven't shared a meal with? Like the importance of gathering and how important it is to come together over a meal and the occasion of that, and then also the people that that are in the restaurant industry as a profession that are so passionate about what they do, sommeliers and chefs and cooks.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's back up a little bit, because I mean that environment, laying out that environment, the challenges, the fact that it is a ripple effect. There's unintended consequences by, it seems like, every decision, whether it's done at a municipal, a provincial, or a federal level. But I want to talk about kind of that evolution. Because when did you open Chambar? When did you open the restaurant?
20 years ago, 2004.
So in 2004, give a little bit of kind of what your research was, what the work was that you did to kind of feel comfortable to be able to, like you talked about, the business plan that you wrote then is still applicable today. You talked about locking yourself in a barn or somewhere to write the business plan. I can't remember where you locked yourself, but
A warehouse, but a barn.
a warehouse. Okay, it wasn't a barn. Fake news. So, but what did that, like, looking at, thinking back, reflecting back on that environment versus what you're challenged with today, what did that look like, kind of those first initial years, and then kind of moving forward to what you just explained?
Yeah, I would say the economic squeeze, like the monopolization, has had a huge effect, but affordability for sure. Like the amount of money that people pay for rent per room, what it was then to now. When we first opened, there was nothing on our menu that was over $20. And we ran that way for almost 2 years before we started going up. We were like really committed to that because what we wanted to do was offer fine dining quality, but in a fun environment. Like this, it's what we thought was missing in Vancouver, that there was really fine dining restaurants, or there was chains, or there was,
Right.
Really casual takeout ethnic food. And so we're like, we're going to offer fine dining quality of food and service in a really fun atmosphere, because the fine dining restaurants were very like stuffy, expensive, and you kind of felt like you were in your grandmother's living room. Like they were just stale. And so we were like, it should be fun. So we had, music, and like it was a fun atmosphere, and it was loose. We were like, there's so many stupid rules in Vancouver, as there still are. But we're like, how do we go right to that line and make it really fun? But people were spending money, and people like to be seen spending money. So the amount that people drank more, like significantly more, which, maybe that's good for the health of
Right.
people overall. But the amount that, when I look at what our liquor sales were as a percent of total sales then compared to now, it's at least a third higher, if not more.
Huh.
So people, the like driving laws, the cost of taxis, the surge pricing of the Ubers and the Lyfts, it tacks on so much money. So if you want to go out and drink, it means you're spending, potentially, depending on where you live, another $30 to $100 on your evening out, which is a bit crazy.
Right.
So if you drive and don't drink, then you don't have that cost. You don't have the cost of the alcohol. You don't have the cost of getting home. So those are the kinds of decisions that people are making. And And there's tons of places, like Australia's like ripping out vines because people just aren't drinking. Like, it's pretty crazy what's happening. That there was this, I mean, obviously COVID, I think there was an 80% increase in liquor sales
Right.
during COVID. So, I love that it was a needed service. I'll keep my opinions on on that.
So with that business plan that you created in 2004, like obviously the pricing is different. You were aiming to kind of stay below that $20. All of that has changed. Maybe people's habits have changed. But what about the business of the restaurant? Like the type of restaurant, the you talked earlier about the systems and scaling. Was that aspect, has that been fairly consistent, the systems that you've used to be effective and run your business?
Yeah, the systems haven't changed that much. The technology has.
Okay,
So
that makes sense.
there's like this plethora of platforms and software that you can use. And I kind of feel like half of them are just like parasites on the sharing economy, like Airbnb and Uber. But the ability to have integrated systems was never an option. Like,
Right.
that was never there. And so, the ability to sell something to somebody who buys a bottle of wine, and that information gets integrated with your reservation system so that the next time they come in, you can have a bottle of wine ready for them that if they enjoyed that one, then they won't likely like this one, and have notes on people and, reach people. There's so many. I think so many of them are not that helpful, and they're just like taking a minuscule cut off everything you do. So it's trying to keep your tech stack tight with the least quantity of platforms that will give you the most is a challenge, where it used to be you'd have your accounting system and a reservation system and a POS, and that's it. Maybe some restaurants had like inventory cost control systems. I mean, when we started, we were doing it in an Excel spreadsheet, and now it's integrated with our POS.
Right.
So whatever we sell automatically takes that out, and we have recipes so that every meal that goes on the table, everything when it's initially made is measured, every ingredient, like we know the yield, the waste on everything we buy by the time it gets to the plate. So it gets to be a bit of a science that way. And once those systems in place, it's pretty easy to it's much easier to manage them and have data to adjust quickly. Like, as an example, if somebody, the cost of our yogurt was going crazy and we couldn't figure out why, or we realized that someone was just overportioning. They were using a cup instead of tablespoon as a measurement. Oh. Those kinds of things. Or like, just tracking things. There's a million ways that you can lose money in a restaurant. So when you get a report every week that says, here's the variance of dollar from what you sold, like what you should have to what you have once your inventory in, then you can look at your highest dollar value and assess which one, like where your priorities for the managers of each of your areas of the restaurant to focus their time, rather than trying to look through a needle in the haystack to try and find where something went. And so I think you just have to have the directive and the intention that if there's a cost out, you got to find it. Like, we had these crazy breakage in plates, and we're like, why are these plates breaking? And so we just followed the route that plate takes, and realized that on one of the racks where the plates get put, the screw had come out of the wall a little bit.
Oh my
so
gosh. Every
time the plate that was like 11th up in the stack got pushed in, it would get chipped on that little screw. So it's like, that's a good analogy of like all of that. You can imagine how many ingredients come through a restaurant, like thousands. So yeah. That's just like, you have to be on it to be seeing where's the issue.
And when did, I mean, you talked about the technology piece. This is absolutely fascinating to me, Karri. Like this is like, just looking under the hood is incredible. when did that change? Like I can imagine that, and you were talking about systems early on. That's been what you brought from your corporate experience, building out the business plan. So like the chipped plate, you might have found even in 2005, right? Like because your
Yeah.
systems are such, and you would have been able to trace it back. But when did the technology change? When did the environment change that you're able to look at to the gram? Maybe that's an exaggeration of your wastage and kind of your input costs into each plate versus like your meal versus what your wastage is and all of that kind of thing. Like is that truly just through the technology piece, or was that some things that you've adjusted in your systems as well?
I mean, some things are adjusted like in the way we operate, but the ability for software and programs, which were pretty clunky initially, like software, it had to be on a PC.
Right.
It was very data entry. And so unless you had the information in and there was no human error, then what you got out of it wasn't helpful. So I would say
Yeah.
the software became really helpful as soon as they were able to operate online and they were able to integrate with other software. Then it was like an exponential increase in actually being useful and helpful. Where before it was like, we make sure that we have everything in these systems in order to be able to pump out the reports so that if we get audited, we can show transparency and that we can show that we've done everything by the book. It was basically for our, accounting and government reporting and paying taxes that we were using all these systems versus being able to be efficient and to react quickly.
So do you see that still evolving? Do you see like the technology has moved so fast, obviously, in the last little while?
I mean,
do you see some of that still evolving in the next little bit?
I think it's evolving because the leaders within those platforms are making use of AI, and
Yeah.
it's pretty incredible to watch. Like as an example, one of the reservation systems has the ability to, based on all the learnings, so they've fed in all the restaurants that are using this reservation system. And so normally when you start the night, you lock in the floor plan. So you have all your reservations and then anything else manual, and it's up to the host's ability and intuition to feel the evening on the floor. Like we usually get around 10-15% no-shows a day, so we'll overbook a little bit. But as far as if somebody shows up and they've brought a couple extra people, or like people
Right.
don't understand the effect of what they do to restaurants usually, but you try and accommodate the best you can. So, but the algorithm of the table, instead of locking it in and then that's it, which means if you have an inexperienced host, she'll be like, I'm sorry, we have no room for you. Whereas the system is constantly assessing how to maximize the tables, the seats, and it's programmed already to be like, this seat can become 2 or 4 or 6 or 8,
Right.
and these ones can come together, these ones can't. So it constantly redoes your floor plan to maximize the ability to be have tables free, essentially.
So I want to dive into or ask you about all of these systems, all of the technology, all of the now with the introduction of AI. How much do you think, like you can imagine that some of the big players, some of the chains with a lot of corporate environment behind them that have the ability to pivot and the aptitude to be able to adopt these systems and the benefit of adopting some of these systems en masse versus you with one location and kind of your limited resources to learn and to adapt and then there's the smaller, mom and pop that are just a kiosk in the mall or something like that. How widely are these systems being adopted, would you say?
I mean, I think there's a portion that is unfortunately necessity.
Yeah.
There's a good portion of interacting with technology that I think is not add value. like for instance, social media. It's like you have to participate in order to be relevant. Does it generate
Right.
revenue? Absolutely not. Does it give people a sense of who you are? Absolutely. It's a touch point. So in a restaurant, you have all of these, like hundreds probably, in the whole experience of from the time you decide that you want to try a restaurant or even search for a restaurant, you have touch points with a customer. And so I think entrepreneurs, especially independent restaurants, they're just like trying to survive. And you've kind of got to do what you have to do, and that's it. And there isn't the time to stop and be really thoughtful about people are spending more and more time online. Like, as an example, when we first opened, there was no mobile use, there was no iPhones.
Right.
So people called in,
Right.
they went to your website. And so their experience of you and the way that you designed your website was around, let's tell a story about ourselves. I mean, my background's marketing, so I like deeply understand this. But you have platforms like Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and whatever, all the rest of it. So much time and energy really wasted. And if you think about the energy on the other side of that, for all of that data to move and store and what that does to our resources, like just to give an example of the waste of energy that it is, 2 Google searches is the same energy as boiling a kettle.
Right. From a power perspective, to use for Google to power their servers and everything
Yeah.
else.
So if you
Yeah.
think about the content,
Yeah.
the amount of content that is just, it's just like for the sake of like being relevant, is just so low value in the big picture, when really it's like people are spending more time online. So the transition has been now that people moved online away from phones, and now they're onto their phones. So from the time that we redid our website about 10 years ago, and it was about 10% mobile users. Well, now it's 90%.
Right.
So your whole experience has to shift depending on the way that people interact. But even online, you have you have this opportunity to interact with people differently. And I think that the tools available are thinking from a practical perspective rather than a emotional connection, which is actually what anybody wants. Is like, I want to feel special. I want to feel like I belong. And like, it's the nature of humans. And I think technology has stripped so much out that now we're finally coming into a place with technology, especially with AI, that we actually are now in a position where we can have that type of interaction that feels actually more real, even though it's online, which is kind of a bit of a like dichotomy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I really think that it's true. Like for the amount of information in AI, it's like the collective conscience, if we chose to see it that way.
Yeah.
I studied ethics, so I spend a lot of time having philosophical conversations with AI just to see where it's at, which I find like exciting and impressive, and I wish more people would use it instead of be scared of it. It is really terrifying, you know, in one sense, but also people aren't going to stop going to restaurants. I really, if I make that true and believe that, whether that is or not, that probably in my lifetime and for the time that I have this business, people will physically go to restaurants. People need to gather, and they want to. They have reason to still. So all the fluctuations and the ups and downs of the economy is just kind of the roller coaster of being in business, and you just innovate and do the things you need to do. But I think technology is finally at the point where we have this ability to be efficient, but also to be thoughtful and make it easy for people. Because usually if you fill out a form to like book something, it's like you might as well fill out a passport application. It's so annoying. And if you're trying to do it by your through your phone,
Yeah.
it's brutal. So like at the moment, I'm redoing all of our tech stack again to be able to be like, okay, actually, how do we just make it really easy for people? If you want to just give me what I need right away, or if I want to peruse
Yeah.
through something, you give people the availability. But it's like what that interaction needs is just as important as every interaction that happens in the restaurant, even though I still believe human connection and interaction is exponentially more important. But if
So,
that
so
gets you there, then you
yeah,
can give that.
Tell me about how you've seen, like, just being there, just being in the restaurant environment for 20 years and watching people and kind of going, more to the psychology of all of it. You've really outlined kind of the change on the connection to the restaurant, especially initially before people actually sit down at a table, and that evolution to it becoming more transactional. What's the experience? What is the evolution of the experience with food? What do you see as changing for people that go into a restaurant and you've moved away from menus and telling the story? They've interacted with the story on your website or interacted with the story on your menu. Now that's all gone. And people are sitting down four at a time at a table with all of them looking at a screen, right? While they're sitting there together. Like, do you still see restaurants as a place for people to come together? And the word that you used earlier, I think, was to celebrate.
Yeah, I mean, when we used the QR codes, which I hated during
Yeah,
COVID,
right.
the staff, of course, it was so easy because they didn't have to like print and update and, stuff the menus with new papers. And so it was a bit of a fight to bring it back. They kind of tried to dangle, like keep
Yep.
that going as long as, like, no, like as soon as you pick up a phone, you just broke the interaction with the person because you took your energy away from them. And now you're staring at this little bright light in a restaurant that we put all of this time and effort into understanding lighting and atmosphere of how to
Yeah.
have, like, and candlelight, and you just killed it.
Yeah.
So no, that's like not happening. So like if as long as I own this restaurant, there will not be screens to order from.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Tell me a little bit about, and I've said before, and I think I'm moving away from this just with time, but I don't want this to be a COVID podcast. Business is hard. It's hard anyway, but I'm really curious. I did a TED talk, TEDx, in early 2023, and I talked about, it was kind of the preempt to the podcast. I talked about the challenges that businesses had, but as we came out of COVID or even through COVID, it gave the opportunity for business owners to be more vulnerable, and it gave the consumer a more opportunity to be empathetic towards business. And I used the example of an A-frame sign that was on a sidewalk out in front of a restaurant, and it just said, "If you don't come in and eat, we don't either," or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but that was something, that a message that could be shared post COVID, that before COVID it would have sounded, trite.
Yeah.
And I think we're moving back to that. Tell me about your experience, kind of through COVID, of watching the community want to support you and want to figure out how to support small business, and where we've gone since then over the last 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely see that, and it's refreshing. I think culturally we have this thing. I don't know if it's Canadian or like but there's this shame around not doing well because of how we define success.
Yeah.
And I think we have some post-COVID. I mean, even before COVID, it's like our definition of success is tied to profitability and money, and we're not considering that we have cultural currency,
Yeah.
and we're not considering that, if what about success from the perspective of well-being? Like, I spent a lot of time in Bhutan and have worked with the Center for Gross National Happiness, and like really understand when a country governs by the well-being of its citizens and the happiness of its citizens, they have, imagine having gross national happiness instead of
Yeah.
GDP. Like, our metrics for decision making are what uphold these systems that are hurting us. But that's what our bureaucracies and government and business systems are still so rigid within. And if we don't evolve without that, outside of that, there's no way. Like, it's just like capitalism is based on this incorrect assumption that we have infinite resources and you can always do things with greater efficiency, which is just simply not true, as we see in the consequence of that. But I really think that it is around, like, our ability to do well in business is about broadening the metrics of decision making of what we consider success to be. And so it's important that we advocate together, because if it's just one person hurting and they don't say anything, then nobody knows. Like, how is a leader in any government or, in any business supposed to know that there's something wrong unless you say? So I think it's important that as sectors we speak up, that we come together and be like, are you having problems with this? Do you struggle with this? Are we all in the same boat here? And that there's appropriate advocacy to say, hey, do you understand what it means when you add another 5% tax on liquor, when
Yeah.
that's our like only hope of a profit margin?
Do you feel it's safe for you as a business owner though to be vulnerable? Like, do you feel like if people truly knew how close to the brink restaurants or retailers or any business was operating, quite frankly, do you think it threatens the viability of your business? Like, does the consumer then say, well, if they're going to go out of business anyway, then I'll just steer clear? Or maybe
Yeah, I would
not.
say, just like understanding the psychology of people, I would say there's a certain part of that is true.
Yeah.
And that if you like whine about how horrible it is,
Yeah.
like people want to be attached to something successful and they want to feel good. And if they want to feel bad, you can just, or feel good because you can watch the news because everything is like so bad. It makes you feel like your life's better. But
Just don't go to social media, because then it seems like everybody else's life is better.
um, so I actually, like, if I was really honest, there's a certain point where I wouldn't publicly talk about how bad things
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
of knowing how people do that. But at the same time, sometimes you want to scream, like, not just for us, but for
Yeah.
all the things in our culture that are so important, that are the fabric that our community is. Like, if you care about something, you have to participate.
Yeah.
If you like a restaurant, go to it. Because if you don't, it won't be there. Like,
Yeah.
that is actually a reality right now. It's like wherever you put your hard earned money, whatever you enjoy, whatever you appreciate, and whatever is of value to you, do it. Because and now we're at this point economically where even when that's true, people can't, because they can't afford it. And
Yeah.
so this is the point that we're in, is like, do you say that just to the people that can afford it?
Right.
And I don't want to say I'm going to completely shift my business and only cater to the people not affected by the economy. But it's like, you do have to innovate and look at why people go out, and then I have to find more people to come out. Or I think it's many combinations of you're really tweaking everything. You're like, can I cut costs without cutting flesh off the bone, so you can't operate? Where can I have more efficiency? Is there ways to navigate costs? Constantly getting quotes to find out, looking at how operations can be more efficient without sacrificing. But it's like, unless you draw the line of like, I'm not willing to sacrifice the values. Like, the whole reason I went into business and didn't stay in corporate is because I get to run a values-based business where the people get put first. So as soon as you start crossing the line, it's a really slippery slope of like, you can always find cheaper.
Yeah.
You can always like pay people less. You can start, it's just like, it's not right. And so what we're in this crunch of, this economic conditions, is people are actually in positions where they didn't know that going into this moment in time that they needed to cash up and get big lines of credit and make sure that they could like weather this. And it's only from the knowing of, the economic crash and COVID also. It's like, okay, all the indicators of economics, the economy is like in recession, they're happening. And so we have to have a readiness and the willingness to, like, how long do you continue to lose money to keep it alive? And what are you willing to risk? Like, am I going to put my home up again? No. Like, when you work really hard to have a home or something, you don't want to like let it go, but people are remortgaging their homes. And so what happens as a consequence of the next round of what people have had to do in order to do that is that we have a collapse of our local food systems. We have, people that have defaulted on their mortgages. We have people that are unemployed and homeless. And like when COVID hit, speaking to people in government and advocating for the sector, I'm like, if you don't sandbag this here and stop it, you think this is bad, you wait for the 27 sectors that the restaurant industry supports to all go down and
Right.
then see what happens. So like, stop it here. Like restaurants, the amount of money that goes into the economy as a result of restaurants is huge. And even not the money side, but the like culture side of how important it is to have restaurants in our, not even like in our communities, is like those values are really important to be upheld.
Do you think there's a vastly different perception around restaurants as a business versus other businesses? Like when you talk about absorbing or assuming risk, the first thing I went to when you talked about putting your house up, I've been there. Like you go out, you want to see, you see an opportunity, a business opportunity, you leverage equity in your house, and you really are putting it. One of my recent guests, we talked about that, taking his down payment that he had saved up with his new wife and instead of buying a house, put it into a business. After 20 years of being in business, some of that is just, I'm not willing to accept that risk anymore, right? Like some of it is just over time, over experience, and you're beyond the point that you want to elevate that risk for yourself. But do you think that there's some perception out there around the restaurant industry in general that it's already a risky endeavor? It's already, the numbers that start and fail, the risk that lenders see associated with it. Is it a harder conversation with government sometimes around some of that stuff?
I don't think it's like from the perspective of lending. I think when we first opened the restaurant, the banks laughed at us because, I mean, first of all, we had no assets, but they're like, yeah, restaurants and garden centers are basically blacklisted. We don't lend to them.
Right. Yeah.
But now restaurants are actually taken seriously. There's miraculously, there's restaurants that continue to open up, despite it. There's so much passion in it.
Yeah.
And people really love what they do. And it's hard to, you're going to tell people not to do that. It's like, such a huge sector that we can't be without it in cities and communities even. So unless there's an acknowledgement of the value to a community or to city of restaurants and to culture especially, but I think it's up to people.
Yeah.
Like it can be an amazing, great business and an amazing way of life. And it's kind of like, it's a bit of a boom bust. So you've got to be in for the long game and have the, fortitude to actually know, okay, how. I think when you're young, you're really scrappy. And I think it's just, a result of getting older where you've worked really hard for something and now you don't want to lose it. When you're young, you've got nothing to lose anyway, so it doesn't matter. And so when you have kids and you have, people that are relying on you, and I have like 143 people that work for me. So that's a lot of people's livelihood that I support. So I take my decisions very seriously. And so when I look at what is the outlook of the restaurant industry in the short term, it's horrible. Will it continue? I don't see restaurants going away. So
do those 143 people see that same positive, like that it's not going away? Do they feel secure? That's my question.
I don't know that they feel that the sector is secure. I hope that they feel that our restaurant's secure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think longevity says a lot.
Yeah.
But I think there's many ways to do anything. And I think the way that you choose to run your business is really what gives the people the feeling of whether there's longevity in it, from whether people feel that way from a sector perspective. I mean, if you want to know what people think of the sector, just look at how many people are registering in the cooking schools or
Right.
hospitality, and you see the decline. Then obviously people saw post-COVID, well, I'm not going to pay for my kids to go into hospitality or go into the restaurant sector or become a cook. I mean, the issue is we need to eat and we need hospitality. And so all of the skills that are within a restaurant that you learn are transferable. And if for any other business venture, anything, if somebody's worked in hospitality, they know how to read people, they know how to work hard, they know how to get along with others. Like I would hire them over anybody else that hasn't, because there's a different work ethic and there's a different understanding and ability to hustle that a lot of people don't have.
Huh. Yeah.
So I think what it does is, I think we're seeing now the generation of like the consequences of helicopter parenting, which is like not
right
for anyone.
Yeah.
But it's just like a restaurant is a place where people can actually learn that fortitude, work ethic, and everything. And I think it's important for people to have some experience, youth especially in the restaurant industry. There's a very good preparedness in how to talk to people. Teamwork.
That interpersonal piece.
How to understand that there's more than just you, there's like you get a really good understanding of, like, we have a tip pool in our restaurant because then everybody helps everybody and they all work together. It's not like I'm here for my business.
For me. Yeah.
Working in a restaurant transforms people away from this individuation that is getting greater and greater as people spend less and less time in offices. And
well, and even what you were saying, like just the connectedness, the what we're losing by bringing people together and sharing food, and going back even to the commoditization piece, like it's all very, very tied together. It's so fascinating, Karri. I feel like I could talk to you for a couple more hours. But I also feel like I've taken a great deal of your day, and really, really appreciate it. Tech troubles and all. My wife and I live a couple of blocks from Chambar, and it's definitely a favorite spot for us to go and share drinks and really nice food with friends, which is where a common friend of ours brought up your name and ultimately connected us. So really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story. And I'm going to put a little asterisk to say that maybe we'll expand on the story down the road. I'll get you back and we can chat a little bit more, because I'm fascinated about kind of the feeling of responsibility over those 140 people, any contemplation about expansion that you've had in the past. There were different pieces I could have unpacked as well. So, but thank you so much for your time today, Karri. What a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.